I stood by and allowed my wife to almost end my son's life. I was happy she did it. My son was very troubled. If you have seen the movie we need to talk about, Kevin, it will really help to understand what I'm talking about. The only difference is that, in the movie, the boy appears normal to his father and only reveals his true nature to his mother. With my son, he didn't hide anything. His behavior was the same with everyone from the day he was born. My son came into the world differently. He was planned. My wife and I wanted a baby and were overjoyed when he was born. He was wanted and loved. We gave him all our affection and did everything we could to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he seemed unhappy. He cried nonstop for 13 months straight. I'm not exaggerating. 13 months without a break. He cried until he lost his voice, yet he kept trying to cry. You could see his little face all scrunched up, but no sound was coming out. Completely hoarse. There were times when he would literally cry in his sleep. I have never seen or heard of another child doing that. We took him to doctors, specialists, changed his diet, held him, rocked him. Toys, swaddling, music, mobiles, everything we could think of. Nothing helped. 13 months of exhaustion, sleepless nights. It was a never-ending struggle. When he finally stopped crying constantly, we thought we had made it through the worst. But it quickly became clear that, for some reason, he just wasn't comfortable in the world. I never saw this kid have a genuine, joyful smile. In all the time I knew him, I saw him grin only a few times, but never out of true happiness. He seemed to take satisfaction only in negative situations, especially when breaking rules or seeing someone else upset. But a real smile from joy? No, never. Not once. He had no interest in anything positive. He seemed driven by anger, and everything he did reflected that. As soon as he could walk, his focus was on breaking things. He would destroy or would try to destroy anything within reach. Throwing things, chewing on them, flushing them down the toilet, whatever he could do. Eventually, he figured out how to take off his diaper and started making messes all over the house. Then he realized he could hide it, making it even harder to clean and causing the house to smell terrible. As he got older, between the ages of 9 and 15, he started doing this in our bed. We had to install a lock on our bedroom door to keep him out, and then he just started doing it in the hallway outside our room. He never outgrew this behavior. As he got older, he became even harder to manage. We had to install a locked door on the kitchen because he would take knives and scratch up the walls and furniture. When he was 10, he hurt me pretty badly with a knife. I still have the scars. And as he grew older, his actions became even more alarming. He started setting things on fire and acting aggressively toward animals in the neighborhood. There was a stray dog that used to hang out near our house. My son injured it in one eye. He also played cruel tricks on cats. Of course, we sought professional help. He spent years in therapy, saw a psychiatrist twice a week, and was prescribed countless medications. But nothing helped. Therapy didn't work. Meds didn't work. Nothing worked. He always seemed upset, taking it out on everything around him. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again. Our reaction this time was completely different. Instead of joy, we felt fear. In the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby, and if they showed the same behaviors as our son, we would look for another option. We knew we couldn't go through that again. We had a daughter. She was normal. Suddenly, we saw what our lives should have been like all along. What things would have been like if our son hadn't been the way he was. She was happy. She was peaceful. I can't describe the relief and happiness we felt. I don't have the words for it. When we brought our daughter home, he started acting out even more. I didn't think it was possible, but he escalated. By this time, he was 17, and we were having explosive arguments every day. After our daughter was born, my relationship with my son was practically non-existent. The only interactions we had were yelling at each other. My wife had it even worse with him. She had nothing left to give. He started spending more time away from home, which was a relief for us. I have no idea what he was doing out in the world, but we were just happy it wasn't affecting us anymore. Because of our son's behavior, we invested heavily in locks around the house. All of the cheap, thin interior doors were replaced with thick, solid wood doors that couldn't be broken down, equipped with key locks that only my wife and I carried keys to. We weren't locking our son up like a prisoner. He had free access to the house and could leave whenever he wanted. My wife and I locked ourselves in rooms to protect ourselves from him. He had turned us into prisoners in our own home. On the day in question, that morning, I had argued with my son, and he had left the house in a rage. My wife and I were enjoying a rare moment of peace in the kitchen while our daughter napped in our bedroom. Then, we heard her cry. Any parent with young children knows that, over time, you learn to recognize different types of cries. There's the cry of hunger, the cry when they need changing, or the cry when they just want to be held. This cry was none of those. This cry was fear. The second we heard it, my wife and I jumped from our chairs and ran to the room. The door was locked as always, and it took a few seconds to find the right key and get it open. When we got inside, we saw our son. Our house was a single-story home, and he had climbed in through the window to get to her. He was standing over her crib, holding a kitchen knife. I have no idea where he got it. It wasn't one of ours. We were always extremely careful with sharp objects and kept them locked away. I believe he must have taken it from somewhere outside our home. My daughter was terrified, crying uncontrollably. He was running the back of the knife across her face, not cutting, just taunting her while she screamed. When he saw us, he smiled. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was already moving to protect her. I didn't think. I just acted. But my wife got there first. It was like watching a movie in fast forward. She struck his hand, knocking the knife across the room, and then shoved him with all her strength. He was pushed back, away from the crib. I picked up my daughter while my wife stood in front of us, shielding us. The worst part was the look on my son's face as he stood there. Blank, emotionless, like he felt nothing. He looked like a stranger to me. My wife took a step toward him. I could have stopped her, but I didn't. She stepped even closer. Again, I could have stopped her, but I didn't. She just stood there, staring at him for a few seconds without saying a word. And then she punched him. Now, up until this point, you might have imagined my wife as a delicate woman, but that couldn't be further from the truth. She's always had a small frame, but fragile? Never. Since her teenage years, she trained in boxing. Back then, MMA didn't exist, but karate and boxing were popular, and my wife had always been skilled at it. We had never laid a hand on him out of anger before, but something inside her broke that day. Years of frustration, fear, and sadness came pouring out. When she hit him, he was stunned. He just stared at her, as if he couldn't process what had happened. She paused for a second and then hit him again. I could have stopped her, could have held her back, taken her out of the room, calmed her down. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching as she continued. Every time he tried to shield himself, she hit another spot. He started yelling, telling her to stop. It was the most real reaction I had ever seen from him in his life. But she didn't stop. She was completely focused, moving with the same precision as if she were training in a gym. I watched for a while. Then, I turned away and walked out of the room with my daughter in my arms. I went to the kitchen and gave her a bath in the sink. That's when I noticed a small cut on the sole of her foot. All the injuries were minor. I cleaned her up, put ointment and bandages on her cuts, and held her until she calmed down. Meanwhile, from the bedroom, I could still hear my son yelling insults at my wife, making awful threats, until eventually he stopped shouting. At that point, I assumed he had passed out, but I could still hear the sounds of the struggle. It went on for a long time, long enough for my daughter to fall asleep in my arms. Finally, my wife came out of the room and sat down across from me. Her hands were red and swollen. She was breathing heavily. We just sat there, looking at each other in silence. After a while, I asked, "Is he okay?" She looked at me and said, "I hope so." I nodded. I knew exactly how she felt. I felt the same way. We didn't know what to do, so we just sat there, waiting. Eventually, my wife started crying and went to take a shower. I stayed where I was, holding our daughter. After a long time, I heard faint sounds coming from the bedroom. I realized my son was still conscious. I wanted to see how bad it was. He was clearly in bad shape. He was lying on the floor, struggling to move. His face was swollen, his eyes barely open, and he wasn't speaking. His movements were slow, like he was exhausted. That was the moment I realized just how far things had gone. My wife had finally reached her breaking point, and I understood. That day felt endless. I was still holding my daughter in my arms, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. My wife sat across from me, breathing heavily, her gaze fixed on some distant point, not saying a word. The silence inside the house was suffocating, but outside, we started hearing voices. That's when I realized that the noise from the fight had caught the neighbor's attention. Someone knocked on the door hard, then again, more urgently. Before I could get up, I heard a voice from outside. "Is everything okay in there?" We heard yelling. I looked at my wife. She didn't seem surprised. Maybe she was just too drained to care about who had been listening. I walked to the door and opened it, finding a group of neighbors standing outside. These were people we had known for years, but they had always kept their distance. Some feared my son. Others simply chose to ignore what was happening. But this time, they couldn't ignore it. "What happened?" one of the men asked, trying to look inside. "Is everyone okay?" My wife stepped forward, crossing her arms with a hardened expression. She wasn't interested in hiding anything. "He tried to hurt our daughter." A heavy silence fell over the group. Those words landed like a thunderclap. "What?" one of the women asked, visibly shocked. "He climbed into her room through the window." I continued, my voice tense. "He had a knife. He hurt her." The neighbors' reactions shifted instantly. What started as murmurs turned into an explosion of outrage. Some people started yelling, asking where he was. Others muttered that they always knew something like this would happen, that it had only been a matter of time. "And you still let that monster live here?" One man spat in disgust. "He should have been locked up a long time ago." The group started moving forward, looking like they were ready to drag him out of the house themselves. My heart pounded, not because I wanted to protect him, but because I knew that if they found him in this state, they would tear him apart. "Where is he?" another neighbor shouted, his face twisted with fury. That's when we heard the sirens approaching. Red and blue lights flashed down the street. Someone else, probably another neighbor, had called the authorities. The shouting died down for a moment. Everyone stepped back, some grumbling in frustration, others exhaling sharply to calm themselves. But no one left. They wanted to see how this was going to play out. The paramedics entered first, followed closely by the police. I just pointed toward the hallway. One of the officers went to check the bedroom and quickly called for backup. My son was still conscious, but he couldn't move properly. He barely had the strength to react. I watched my wife as she stared at him, completely devoid of emotion. To her, he was nothing anymore. "What happened here?" one of the officers asked, looking at us seriously. My wife spoke first. "Our son tried to hurt our baby. He broke into her room through the window and had a knife." The officer frowned. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't have to think about it. I looked at my wife, and she was already nodding. "Yes." The officers began taking our statements right then and there while the paramedics worked on stabilizing my son. The neighbors weren't satisfied. They wanted more. They wanted justice right then and there. "He can't get away with this." Someone yelled. "That kid is a danger to everyone." The police had to intervene, telling everyone to stand down. Some people were so enraged that it looked like they were about to charge at him. One of the officers had to raise his voice to restore order. "He's being taken into custody, but you cannot interfere." They loaded him into the ambulance, but not like a regular patient. 2 police officers went with him. He was under guard. Meanwhile, another officer handed us a form and instructed us to go to the station to file a formal report. "Are you going to press criminal charges?" My wife looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a certainty in her eyes that left no room for doubt. "Yes," I answered for both of us. And just like that, everything began. We knew this wasn't the end. In reality, it was just the beginning of a long battle. But one thing was certain. For the first time in years, our house felt just a little bit safer. And now, he would finally have to face the consequences of what he had done. Filing the report felt like the final step to ending this nightmare. Deep down, I knew the justice system was flawed, but I wanted to believe that this time, with everything that happened, it would be different. My wife and I went to the police station that same night, after making sure her daughter was safe at a trusted neighbor's house. The atmosphere at the station was cold, mechanical. The officer on duty looked at us with tired eyes, as if we were just another problem in a long list of problems he had dealt with that day. We were made to wait in uncomfortable plastic chairs before being called in to give our statements. My wife spoke with a steady voice, but exhaustion seeped into her every word. We recounted everything: his history of aggression, the disturbing incidents with animals, every violent outburst we had endured, all leading up to the moment he climbed into our daughter's room. We detailed how he entered through the window, the knife he was holding, the way he hurt her. The officer listened, took notes, and asked questions. "Do you have any physical evidence of what happened tonight?" My wife and I exchanged glances. The nursery still had signs of forced entry. The police had taken the knife, but it was just an ordinary knife. There were no witnesses who had seen what happened. "He tried to kill our baby," my wife exclaimed, disbelief and fury in her voice. The officer sighed, his expression one I had seen too many times before: resignation. "I understand, ma'am, but without solid evidence, no cameras, no direct witnesses, it's difficult to build a strong case." "Are you serious?" I asked, feeling my blood boil. "This guy has been a threat for years. He's going to come back." The officer closed his notebook and looked at us seriously. "You know how the system works. Even if we take this to a judge, if he denies everything and there's no physical proof, he can walk free." My wife buried her face in her hands. Something inside me shattered. Our son had tried to kill our daughter, and now they were just going to let him go? We spent over an hour at the station, answering questions, signing documents, listening to legal procedures. In the end, all we got was a restraining order, something that meant nothing if he decided to come back. Days later, the news we had feared arrived. The case wasn't moving forward. Not enough evidence. No clear proof. They were releasing him. My wife was sitting on the couch when she got the call. She didn't even respond to the officer. She just hung up and looked at me. "He's being released," she said, her voice emotionless. She didn't need to say anything else. My chest tightened. Our daughter was playing on the carpet, completely unaware that the danger hadn't passed. When the neighbors found out, outrage spread like wildfire. Everyone was furious. They had seen him being taken away. They had heard our story. No one wanted that monster back in the neighborhood. And then one night it happened. My wife and I were trying to keep our routine, but the tension was unbearable. Suddenly, we heard noise outside, shouting. I went to the window and saw a crowd gathered at the corner. In the middle of them, my son was on the ground, surrounded by furious men and women. My heart pounded. My wife got up and came to the window. We watched, saying nothing. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel concern. I just waited. "He's free," one of the men yelled. "If the system won't do anything, we will. He tried to kill his own sister. He thinks he could just come back here like nothing happened." The crowd was growing angrier. Some kicked him as he curled into himself. Others grabbed his shirt, shaking him, screaming in his face. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Confess," a woman shouted. "Say it, or you don't walk away from here." They held him up by his collar, forcing him to look at them. His voice was shaking, barely a whisper. His face was bruised, his expression desperate. I knew it wasn't remorse. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was just scared for himself. "Fine, I did it," he screamed, his voice breaking. "I did it." Silence fell over the street. He confessed. Someone yelled. A phone was pulled out, recording everything. My son was crying, begging them not to kill him. But the crowd didn't let up. "Turn yourself in. Now, or we settle this here." He looked around, searching for an escape, but there was none. If he ran, they'd beat him until he couldn't move. The police arrived minutes later, called by someone in the neighborhood. When they saw the scene, they understood immediately. My son was handcuffed in the middle of the street. This time, there was no escape. There was video proof. There were witnesses. As they put him in the police car, the neighbors erupted in applause. Some cried out of anger, others out of relief. My wife and I stood on the sidewalk, watching the car drive away. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. My wife reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. "It's over," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just stood there, feeling the weight of freedom settle in. The following days felt different. Our home felt different. The suffocating heaviness that had always lingered was simply gone. Our daughter would grow up without living in fear. My wife could sleep peacefully, and I could finally breathe. Time passed. Life moved on, and for the first time in years, our house felt like a real home. Our daughter grew up without fear, without needing to check if the doors were locked, without having to sleep with the terror that something might happen to her. My wife and I learned to breathe again, to sleep without anxiety, to live without constantly expecting the worst. We didn't talk about him. His name wasn't mentioned, and over time, it was as if he had never existed. Like a ghost from a dark past that life had forced us to carry, but that had finally been erased. Until one day, the news came. It happened by chance. We didn't receive an official call, no notice from the prison. We found out because a neighbor, who had a relative serving time in the same penitentiary, mentioned it as if it were just another piece of gossip. "Did you hear?" He asked, almost casually. "Your son. He died in prison." My wife and I froze. For a moment, we didn't know what to say. I had expected many things, but not this. "How?" I managed to ask, my voice quieter than I intended. The man sighed, glancing around before answering. Things worked differently in there. Well, he wasn't an easy person. You know that better than anyone. He kept acting the same way, making enemies, causing trouble. And when people inside found out what he had done out here, I didn't need to ask anything else. I already knew what that meant. The news hit me in a strange way. It wasn't a deep shock, nor an overwhelming sadness. Just an odd, quiet weight in my chest. My wife looked away. "When did it happen?" "A few weeks ago." We hadn't been informed because no one had cared enough to tell us. His body had probably been treated like any other unclaimed prisoner. Maybe he had been buried in a nameless grave. Maybe someone had tried to contact us, but we had changed our phone numbers, our address, our lives. And there we were, standing on the sidewalk, hearing from a stranger that our son was dead. My son was dead. The words circled in my mind mechanically, without truly sinking in. "I'm sorry," the man said hesitantly. I nodded, not answering. My wife took my hand and gave it a light squeeze. When the man walked away, we remained there, silent. We didn't cry. We didn't speak. We just took deep breaths, letting the weight of the news settle over us. It was strange. A son is a son. No matter what he did, no matter how much pain he caused us, he was still our blood. And yet, relief outweighed the sadness. It's horrible to say, but it's the truth. We had spent years living in fear, in anguish, carrying an unbearable burden. When he was arrested, we already felt free. But knowing he was gone meant he could never hurt us again. He could never look at our daughter again. He could never manipulate, threaten, or destroy again. It was truly over. "Do you think we're bad people for feeling this way?" My wife whispered. I looked at her and saw that her eyes were slightly teary, but not with grief, not with longing. I sighed, feeling the cool air against my face. "I think we're just human." She nodded in understanding. We walked back home without saying anything else. And for the first time since this nightmare began, our house no longer carried a shadow. It was just a home where our daughter could grow up without fear, and where we finally could live.